So the topic on the table for today is storytelling. It really is the endless and ubiquitous topic of what we all think about. And so much of Museums on the Web over 20 years has been about finding the right tool sets to enhance telling of stories for the audiences and communities that we serve. And so, in the most ironic of statements, Museums on the Web has never been about the technology. It's always been about what the technology allows us to do.
Good. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces. Thanks for coming out. We are going to talk about storytelling this morning, and hopefully by the end of the morning, I'll convince you that it's worth your time investing not only in the content that you're sharing, but also the way in which you share it through story that can make an extended difference to your audiences beyond just improving their knowledge, okay? So why should stories matter in the cultural sector? Stories help build empathy. Now I'm saying this, and actually as I was doing a little bit of research, I found scientific backup for this. There's a professor from the Claremont Graduate University named Paul Zak, and he's a neuroscientist and a chemist. And he found that character-driven stories consistently cause people to produce this chemical called oxytocin. It motivates you towards cooperation with other people, and it does this by enhancing your sense of empathy and your ability to relate or connect or experience the emotion of other people. In my opinion, there are not enough storytellers in our field. It is a special art and a skill, and we honor art and skill in our field, but we don't employ storytellers.
But I wanted to throw out an idea to sort of respond. First of all, is that most of the storytelling you refer to in museums was about the things. And I would challenge you to say that the story doesn't necessarily have to be about the things. The story can be about people's response, or in the first example you gave of the income inequality, that story.
And we know that people also very often consider going to a museum a social experience. And I would argue that storytelling, from the beginning of what storytelling was in human history, was a social experience. It wasn't me just telling you, it was me talking in a group and us sharing in a group. So I think storytelling in a museum could encourage a social experience in a museum.
When I go to a museum and I have everything dictated to me, I feel very, very upset, and and I leave, and I.
So that's like all the time.
Well, I didn't want to offend anybody, but sure. Yes. So I think there is something about who is the expert, and what are the ways of sort of encouraging a more sort of leveling of the playing field between who can contribute to this stuff, who can make the experience of the museum a more interesting, immersive, story-filled kind of place.
What I also noticed in my time working in the audio tour and multimedia tour industry was that we endlessly aspired in the early thousands to random access, giving everybody their own experience of a museum visit or a cultural visit. And very often people were as alienated by that choice as they were by the sense of the museum as temple. So that's a very difficult balance to strike as well, between a voice of authority and bringing you in, triggering that
Oxytocin.
No, that would be, I was going to say, I don't think we're arc-lighting this, but we want to trigger that empathy and make people feel welcomed and safe, and then they can begin to explore their own opinion, their own ideas of what they see or experience. Sorry.
So a couple of the speakers, both Halsey and Rob, were talking about different types of stories, and I liked that you were talking about experiential and immersive, but we didn't really touch on interactive, which I think is what both Rob and Halsey's stories were. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit more about how to make stories responsive and interactive so that they're not just linear.
I'm from izi.TRAVEL, which you just saw, and what we started to do, we introduced a kind of guided tours which is made in the form of quests. So in order to unlock the next story, you have to answer the question or probably stood in some place.
The thing that interested me the most was there were a few little points where when you chose it, what you got was something that looked like the content was made on the fly by someone talking into their computer. And so they're just looking to the computer and talking. And that to me was that wonderful moment. because I was looking into my computer. And so I'm not sure if they just did it for budget or whatever, but it was a beautiful moment because it was less produced, but it made me feel like it was like a little wormhole.
I love hearing the less produced phrase, because as much as I'm an audio guy and I love to have good sounding audio and I love to have everything sound wonderful and pristine, there is, every time I create a project and I want to sort of populate it with audio, I don't go to my studio and sit there in an isolated sound booth and get a really nice microphone and record those quote unquote experts. I make them use an iPhone or an Android in the gallery and use the crappy mic and have it sound a little echoey because they're in the space. And then that content is sort of created where it ultimately resides.
We're only ever putting truth on the wall of the museum, but truth is such a layered concept. Think of Schindler's List, right? A fictionalized story about true events that probably has had more to do with causing people to care about the Holocaust than many museum exhibitions have.
I'm interested in that in terms of storytelling, of like whose story it is, where the information's coming from, but also valuing lots of people's knowledge instead of just experts.
I just add to that, we've been talking a lot about story, but story doesn't necessarily mean words. So just to, think story broadly. Story is pictures, story is sound, story is printed words.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to take the opportunity to extend on that and ask a question back to the audience, because I sort of threw out that aesthetics and immersion are part of storytelling, which I don't know if I believe it or not.
But immersive does not need to be headphones in ear, because all of a sudden I'm not walking to the person next to me. If I look at suspension of disbelief, like movies, when I go to a movie, I'm not sitting in a movie theater. I am in that story. Mm-hmm. And how do we get that into our exhibits? And I mean, that's something that I do every day, but I'm not in that art museum white box world. I think there's baggage that comes with that a lot of your trouble points are because of the white box. Mm-hmm.
The authority, the white cube business that it holds us back, I think.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that there's a real distinction in this practice between different kinds of museums and indoor and outdoor spaces. There's heterogeneity everywhere, right? But even in places that are very immersive, I think we're still struggling with other issues of authority and fiction and story, and how do you tell a story that is inherently interactive and nonlinear and social and organic, and how does it evolve, and all of those things I think are hitting all of us.
Point is that in order to get to some level, it's very important to start to make very first steps, and that's our suggestion. That if we make a kind of core of museums here in Boston who start to play with us this game and start to publish the content, at first very simple, and then it will grow in quality. At some moment, all those complicated things, you will learn how to do it in practice. So we are here to help. We can even sponsor some of these developments. So please contact us, and we want to experiment with you here in Boston.
There'll be a number of these events in physical locations, but the virtual community is now established with you as first participants. And we will report on this in April in Los Angeles at the conference, but also throughout the community. And thank you.
When you create an audio guide for a museum in the traditional way, you'd usually write and then approve lots of text first. Then you'd go to a recording studio, they'd record your script using a professional voiceover artist on expensive equipment. Then the audio engineer would process it all, edit and cut, trying to achieve best possible quality of the sound. Next, you'd number the tracks and copy them into hundreds of devices. And finally, your museum audio guide is finished. Now you're ready to entertain and inform your visitors with accurate and hopefully interesting stories about your exhibits.
Fortunately, technology and people's ideas how to use it are developing fast. Nowadays, good audio guides mean much more than boring old text. These days, modern recorders are good enough for high-quality recording of a human guide in the museum itself. Live recordings with real background sounds make stories much livelier and more entertaining. So a set of these recordings actually becomes a museum's audio guide, that can be listened to by visitors from their mobile phones. And that's not all. Using the izi.TRAVEL platform, museums can create different stories for different types of visitors about the very same artifact. Visitors get almost individual content. Every visitor can then choose and listen to the kind of content which appeals to their age group and their interests. No longer will your visitors fall asleep with boredom. So make your museum audio guides in this easy way, with no complications. Look for more details on our website.